Today we're driving an old friend. I've known this car for almost half my life. I got it in 2012 and it was my first ever car. Now it's 2024, it's got 56,000 miles on it. I've just refreshed it, I've gone through it, I've gotten it ready for spring, and I'm super excited to share it with you. This is my 2009 Chevrolet Cobalt SS Turbo. And when I was 14, my grandpa decided it was time for me to have my first car. And I'm not ashamed to admit that this is what he bought for me. My whole life growing up, my grandpa always promised me that he would get me a safe, nice set of wheels for my first car. And boy, did he deliver. And boy, was I weird as a 16-year-old because I never drove this car in winter. I cared about this thing so much that I garaged it and bought myself a 97 Ford Probe to handle all of the winter slushy months. So this thing stayed absolutely pristine, and I'm super excited to take you guys out on the road and show you what it's like to drive today and talk about what it's been like to own this thing for 12 years. I'm now 26. This thing is just as fun to drive as it was when I got it. When I learned to drive on this thing as a 14-year-old with my permit, I learned stick in this car. I went to prom in this car. I drove this thing to high school for the first time, parked it in the parking lot. I drove this car to college. And oh my gosh, I just have so many memories in this car. So before we get into all of that and talk about what it's been like to own, let's give you some basics on the Cobalt SS Turbo. So a lot of you are probably familiar with the first generation Cobalt SS, which was supercharged. That was built from 2005 to 2007. In 2008, they switched things up, gave this thing quite a bit more power and a turbocharger. So power output, 260 horsepower, 260 pound-feet of torque. Of course, it's front-wheel drive, and it has a 5-speed manual transmission. That was the only available setup for the SS, and they didn't build many of these. In fact, in 09, there were only about 500 or so Victory Red cars like mine. And when I read that as a 16-year-old, I knew that I could not expose this car to the elements during the winter. So that's why it stayed so nice. And I'm so glad I did that. I know that I'm kind of joking about it right now, but it's so cool to still have my first car for one, but also to have it in the exact condition it was in when I got it. So I plan on keeping it that way. And I'm also proud of myself for not ruining this as a teenager and, you know, putting stupid spoilers and wheels and lowering it and cutting the exhaust off and everything. Because the only thing I ever did to this was put a cold air intake on it. And I don't regret that because it makes cool turbo noises, which you all will hear in a little bit. So this car, when it was new, it was a little bit underappreciated and kind of overlooked because the SS package got you some cool things. We have 4-piston Brembo brakes here in the front. These were standard on all SS cars. We also have this unique lip kit that runs the front bumper, the side skirts, as well as the rear bumper. An optional high-rise spoiler was available, but my car does not have it. I just have the base spoiler that you could get on base cars. We have these 18-inch split 5-spoke wheels. Inside, we have these beautiful SS bucket seats, which I absolutely love. Mine are trimmed in red as well, which I think goes very well with the Victory Red exterior. Like I said, all of them had a 5-speed manual transmission, and this had a unique shifter to the SS as well. We have a leather steering wheel with white stitching. We have SS badging on the dash, and honestly, from the outside, it's pretty dang understated. They all had fog lights as well. We'll pop the hood and show you this 2-liter Ecotec LNF, as the Cobalt guys call it. I never got too, I don't want to say caught up, but I never really went down the rabbit hole that much. After the cold air intake, I was so concentrated on just making turbo noises that I didn't really care about anything else. In 2009, this car had an hood strut. Can you believe it? A lot of new cars don't have that. The engine bay is kind of gross. I haven't gotten to detailing that yet. This car has been somewhat hibernating for the last 3 years in the warehouse, and I haven't found time to drive it, which is really disappointing, and I'm not too happy with myself for letting this thing sit for so long. But with the help of Cap's Garage and Kumho Tire, we got this thing out and ready to go. Put a new air filter on this K&N Typhoon intake, and additionally, we went through and did a bunch of other things. Keone from Cap's changed the oil. We've got new brake fluid in this car, fresh brakes all the way around, all 4 corners, and I'm a little bit upset with myself over this as well, because I accidentally bought what are called semi-metallic brake pads, and they are the loudest brake pads I've ever heard in my entire life. So you all will be able to experience that with me. I did order some ceramic pads, and they should be coming in the next week or so, but I've been dying to get this video out, so you all are gonna have to suffer listening to the loud brakes with me and feel my pain. Let's shut this hood. That's shut. And also, Kumho Tire hooked me up with these 225/40 R18 Extra PS 91 summer performance tires. And not just saying this because they so graciously sponsored these for me, but these are the best tires I've ever had on this car. They're the third set, factory set. Actually, no, sorry, they're the fourth set of tires I've had on this car, because I've just kind of switched things around a few times. But these so far make this thing handle the best, so I do love it. This car is an open diff. A limited slip was available. There aren't too many options on this car. There are only two. The first option being the power moonroof here on, well, the roof. And then we also have a spare tire in the trunk. Those are the only two options on this thing. And I do actually have the Monroney. Shut, thank you. I do actually have the Monroney for the car. You can see here it was built September 29th of 2008. Total vehicle price, $24,920. Base price was $23 grand. It's rated 22 city, 30 on the highway. Over my 12 years, you know, driving up to college and back, I've noticed around 30 to 34 mpg is usually what I get. And my combined figure is usually about 25, which is exactly what this is rated for. We have a Pioneer 7-speaker sound system, which bumps. I thought I was the coolest kid in the world driving this thing to high school with my massive Pioneer subwoofer in the trunk. So we'll pop that and show you now. It's also crazy to think that when I got this car, it was only 3 years old, and it still had a warranty. This had a 5-year, 100,000 mile powertrain warranty. So obviously that's not something you think about when you're a 14-year-old, but it's wild that this car was still so new when I got it. So in the trunk, I have a car cover, which I haven't even used in like 5 years, so that probably needs to go away. But you can see our Pioneer subwoofer. And then under the floor here, well, for one, we have our battery, but also we have our spare wheel and tire, which was an option. There's a little GM service parts identification tag there on the left. Little luggage net, always nice. Let's jump in, let's go for a drive, because I think we've spent enough time walking around this thing. So, if you're unfamiliar with the Cobalt, at this point you probably aren't, but it replaced the Cavalier, and it's the predecessor to the Cruze. The Cobalt SS was kind of GM's last performance compact car, because they never did a hot Cruze. This was kind of the last of its kind, and production ended in 2010, as that was the last model year. Got a small back seat. I did actually use this plenty of times to cart friends around, and there's a pretty decent amount of room back there. But where the magic happens is up here with these very aggressively bolstered bucket seats. You can see we have our GM Performance Division tag on there. Jump in, we'll put this down so you all can see the interior. Leather wrap steering wheel. This isn't unique to the Cobalt. They use the steering wheel in just about everything. We've got red and silver and black face gauges. We have a matching pillar mounted boost gauge, which I love. Super fit for the era, you know, kind of coming off the craze of Fast and Furious and everything. You were able to option in a digital boost gauge there on the left-hand side, which I do kind of wish my car had, but there's something really cool and just cheeky and honest about this analog boost gauge. All right, let's fire this thing up. I'm gonna take my key fob off. I had this little connector back in the day to remove the key fob. For one, because I didn't like it swinging around, but also because this car was under recall, because a bunch of people died because their ignition switches were shutting off because they had like 6 pounds of keys hanging off their key rings. But yeah, so let's fire it up. So you can see here, 56,958 miles. When I bought this car, it had just under 30,000 miles on it. So in my 12 years of ownership, I've only put about 27,000 miles on this Cobalt SS. We've got a stock exhaust on this thing. It is still a little bit rowdy. It's not the quietest thing in the world. To give you some revs here. pretty normal eco-tech stuff there, and you can hear the blow-off valve that turbo under the hood, which sounds excellent. Pretty scratchy, plasticky rental car spec dashboard in this. This is not unique to the SS. All Cobalts had this. There's just not a lot going on in here, but that's part of the reason I love this car so much. We've got an aux input, which was a lifesaver. Back in high school, I was able to play all of my own music on my phone. We've got no automatic climate control, but we don't even have a center console in this car. We just have a parking brake and then a little like tray if you want to have a bunch of stuff slide around and drive you nuts while you're driving. But I did keep this thing clean always, and I feel like that kind of shows with the interior. You've got this little hidden compartment here, which has a bunch of my old registrations and things, so we won't open that fully, but there's a button in there to pop the trunk from the inside if you don't want to use the key fob. Well, I think that covers all of our bases here for the Cobalt SS Turbo. Let's go out on the road and let's talk about what this is like to drive, and then I'll talk about kind of some of the maintenance things I've done to this over the past 12 years. And then I think if you guys like this car and if you want to see more, we'll do some of our normal stuff in it. We'll do some commutes, maybe we'll do a road trip, but I would like to keep this car on the channel. I obviously plan to keep it around. I don't ever plan on selling it. I've kept it this long. I'm pretty dang committed. So we have a tilt steering column, which I'm actually going to move up just slightly. It does not telescope, but it gets out of the way if you want some more room for your legs. Reverse lockout over here. Reverse is to the right and down. I'm so used to putting the car in reverse before I leave to show the backup camera. So I'm just like programmed to do that. I drive so many new cars. Glorious turbo noise. I'm gonna be a little bit hard on these brakes during this video, so forgive me and understand that the reason I'm doing that is to try and not have to hear the terrible screech of the brakes. There is a turkey over there. This car has a really nice clutch feel, a really nice distinguishing grab, and the shifter is really easy to navigate as well. So this was a great car to learn manual on when I was 14. I remember my dad teaching me in the elementary school parking lot. Hear those brakes? You get some pretty gnarly turbo sounds from this thing as well. I was surprised at how much simply putting a cold air intake on this car opened it up and let it breathe so much and make all the fun turbo noises. It's just so much fun. This car never fails to make me smile. Man, these PS91s freaking grip. Yes. Okay, so let's talk about a couple of things with the driving experience in this car. Well, for one, we have electric power steering, which nowadays is pretty frowned upon, and a lot of people, you know, like to harken back and say, oh, I remember the days when we had mechanical power steering, but the steering feel in this car is honestly pretty good. I do wonder what the limited slip would feel like. With these new tires, I don't often have any like one-wheel peel action, but I think with a front diff, you'd be able to corner even harder in this. But despite this having electric power steering, you're able to place this front end really nicely. The steering has a nice weight to it. can see this car hardly weighs anything. So you can just flick it around like nothing. There's those brakes. Let's try and get some heat in those real quick. Super easy access to our traction control button. It's just here to the right of the steering wheel. Tap it once, you get traction off. Tap it twice, it puts you into what's called competitive mode, which is another thing that's surprising to learn about this car if you didn't already know. This has a couple of different performance-y features, one of which being no lift shift. Hold on. Rotates beautifully. Sometimes that rear end comes around just slightly. We just have a solid axle in the back, so it'll cop a wheel during autocross and everything else. So we have no lift shift, and we also have launch control in this Cobalt SS Turbo, believe it or not. And not only did that give me bragging rights in high school to be able to say that my car has launch control and yours doesn't, but it helped me learn how to properly launch a car. And we'll do that up here, and we'll show you how launch control works. Pretty bumpy section of road right here. You can hear all of those late 2000s GM plastics rattling around. Just adds character. Okay, so we'll go through this whole process again and show you how to do it. So if you got traction on, obviously come to a complete stop. Put the car in first gear, hit traction once, hit traction twice, competitive mode, and you can see launch control. So this will now control the revs, and all I've got to do is work the clutch. And in its day, that was good for 0 to 60 in under 6 seconds, which was a big deal in 2009 for a hot hatchback, or sorry, for a hot compact that cost less than 25 grand to be putting up numbers like that. It was unheard of. Not to mention, this car at Car and Driver's Lightning Lab was beating things like the Lotus Elise, the Mitsubishi Evo 10, the Challenger SRT8, big names in the performance car world back in the day. And this was faster than all of them around Virginia International Raceway. And you know, I told everybody that in science class or whatever. Pulled out the little number chart and everything. Okay, so you've seen how this drives if you're driving it spiritedly. How is it like to drive on a day-to-day basis? What's it like to live with this car? Well, considering that I've lived with it for 12 years on and off, I feel pretty qualified to tell you. For one, no center console, so your right arm just kind of dangles down here. But it is a manual, so, you know, unless you're on the highway, usually you're using this right hand anyways to change gear. This seat, as you'd expect, is kind of hard, and I did actually drive this car a number of times. This person is yelling to nobody. I drove this car a number of times to Chicago and back. Having family in Chicago growing up, this car saw quite a few road trips there. I also drove it one time down to Lexington, Kentucky to buy an E90, which was a terrible idea, but I think that's the longest road trip I ever took it on. I think that was like 5.5, 6 hours, and it's always handled the trips like a pro. The seats, I'll be honest, are not the most comfortable thing to sit in for more than like an hour. You do start to get backache, and you don't have a ton of adjustability. All they do is go up, down, forward, and back. So that's that. But otherwise, as far as just driving this car on the highway, you know, it has good road manners. It's not terribly loud wind noise-wise. You do, you know, lack a bit of that sound deadening that you would get in something a bit more luxurious. You have to remember at the end of the day, this is still a Chevy Cobalt. This is nothing fancy or state-of-the-art. It's just an economy car with some go-fast bits put on. And this was just such a cool era for cars like that and cars in general. And it's kind of a trend that's coming back with the Elantra N. Volkswagen's always been in the game. They've always had the GTI. But Civic Type R is back. So it's cool that hot compacts do still exist. Miata! I do love this shifter. The only thing I've noticed over the past, probably 6 or 7 years, occasionally the first shift into 5th gear in the morning after cold start will grind. But there is a way to get around it. You just double clutch into 5th going from 4th, and usually that saves it. So I had forgotten this when I got this car out for the first time and scared the crap out of myself grinding it into 5th gear. But now that I remember the old ways, I have not done that again, so that's good. Otherwise, maintenance has kind of been a breeze on this car. The only real things I've ever done to it were some sway bar links, because they're plastic from the factory, so I put some metal ones on because the plastic ones were clunking about quite a bit. A number of oil changes, probably 10 of them at this point, or probably 12, because usually we do it once a year. Number of oil changes, the odd coolant exchange, brake fluid. These are all things that I've done recently as well to the car. But to be honest with you guys, I know that I haven't driven this as much as a normal person would. In fact, I've only put about 2 years worth of miles on this car in my 12 years of ownership, but it's been worry-free. And I hope to keep it that way. And I think it goes a long way to say that this car has done a lot of sitting around every winter, and the past couple of years solid. I only got it out one time. And after all that time of sitting, it fired right up and just acted like nothing was wrong. So kind of a testament to the simplicity and pretty decent build quality here of this car. We've got automatic headlights, which it's a Chevy from 2009, so they're just on all the time if you leave it in auto. And I'll let you observe NVH here on the highway a little bit. At 260 horsepower, of course, not the quickest thing in the world, but this car was honestly the perfect performance level for an enthusiast that had never driven a car before, me as a teenager. And it taught me a lot of things about car control, about not killing yourself going around corners too quickly. And I think the fact that I cared about it so much also helped. ESC kicking in a little bit there. It's got a pretty good stability control system. Ooh, bird! Something about this car attracts birds, and this isn't going to be funny because obviously you guys don't know the lore of my childhood, but I have hit so many birds in this car. I love the way this car changes direction, and I love kind of the old school lightweight feel of this. And I know it's not super old school. It's 2009. It's, God, how old is this car at this point? 15 years old. That's terrifying to think about. But it still kind of has that older car charm to it, where you do still have a pretty connected feel with this thing. These cars are just impossible to find in this condition now, which makes me so happy that I saved this and kept it as nice as I did, because I've only ever seen maybe 3 or 4 more cars that are in this condition, and all of the other ones are just terrible. I mean, I don't know of any other word to describe them, but you know, you've got your fair share of race cars that people have made out of these, and it's easy to bolt on a couple of parts, have it tuned, and put down like 400 wheel horsepower in these. People do it all the time, even more. I've seen 600 horsepower LNF Cobalts. It's absolutely nuts the amount of power that people push out of these things. But I love having one that's almost completely stock because it's such a rarity. All of these cars were also owned by high schoolers like me and people that wanted to make a car fast for cheap. And that is, unfortunately, what killed a lot of these. Along with rust, being in the Midwest, Cobalts didn't really hold up too well to that, so a lot of them are in scrapyards. In 2012, we paid just about 14 grand for this car, and I'd like to think that it's worth probably about that today. But anyways, I got it from a private seller on Craigslist. I was tasked with finding my own car, which I was glad about because I didn't want anyone else picking for me. But I had a couple of requirements back in the day, and it was that the car had to be either all-wheel drive or front-wheel drive. It had to be American, and it had to be under 15 grand. And luckily, my parents and grandfather have kind of gotten away from the all-American car sort of lifestyle because I have grown up and I have convinced them that foreign cars are nice as well. But alas, back in the day, I could only get something that was American. Those were the rules. I was a child and I couldn't argue. So my choices were essentially a Cobalt SS, a Ford Focus, and well, that was it actually. I forgot that they told me that the car couldn't be more than 5 years old, which means I was pretty limited there as well. And my personal requirement is that the car had to be a manual because I was keen to learn the ways of driving manual. So that's how I settled on this car, which sounds really negative, but I'm honestly really glad that I had those requirements because this car has just been the best. I really have nothing bad to say about this car after owning it for so long, and there probably aren't many other people out there that have owned a Cobalt SS for as long as I have. So if you have any questions about this car, what it's been like to live with for so long, let me know. Let me know in the comments. Let me know if you have one of these. I would love to hear your story about yours as well, because they are so hard to come by now. I always get excited when I see another Cobalt SS Turbo out in the wild or on the internet or anything else. You'd also think at this point you'd start to see them pop up on like Bring a Trailer, Cars and Bids, any of the kind of enthusiast car websites. You think you'd see clean versions pop up, but they just genuinely really are not out there. So this car is a bit of a unicorn for what it is. I have a ton of good memories in this car, and if I told you about all of them, it would take the entire video. So let's wrap this up for today. This car's not going anywhere, so we have plenty of time to make other videos on this car and answer any questions, talk about anything that you guys would like to hear about. So make sure you leave those in the comments down below if there's anything specific you want to know about this car. But, you know, every weekend I was out on Woodward or Telegraph or somewhere cruising with this thing, cruising with my friends, going on drives. I think this car also helped me build a friend group. It helped me grow as a teenager, you know, in the community aspect. Not only did it comfortably and efficiently and reliably get me to class, get me to work everywhere I needed to go, it was a real friend, and it helped me, you know, get human friends as well that weren't cars. But it's just been the most wonderful vehicle, and I wouldn't trade it for anything in the world. It's gonna be with me until the end, and then, you know, someone will have to figure out what to do with it when I die. But until then, it's gonna be mine. And if you stayed around this long, you get a little bit of extra lore with the Cobalt SS. So I just got new plates for the car, but this is the plate that I've always had, just in older design plate form on the car. And it was a plate that my dad surprised me with when we first got the Cobalt SS. I've gone by Topher my whole life as far as my family goes. My cousin Anne-Marie started calling me this when I was just a wee lad, so SS Topher it was for the Cobalt SS. Also, I forgot to mention at the beginning, a big reason also of why I wanted a Cobalt SS is because this was always the starter car that you had in video games. Need for Speed Most Wanted, Need for Speed Pro Street, and so many more. So I played this car in video games growing up. It was cool to actually have this car as the starter car. It felt like I was in my own little video game. All right, I think that's enough rambling for today, and that's gonna wrap up our little brief overview of the 12-year ownership on this Cobalt SS Turbo. Again, please comment below if you have any questions regarding this thing, but that's going to wrap it up for us today. Thank you guys all so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one. Take care.